Well, this was a fun week. It's always exciting for me as a pastor to be a part of Vacation Bible School, even as a youth pastor for years, and it's always a fun week for me. As a dad, this week takes on an extra special emphasis for me, and so it's always fun for me as a father to watch my children grow in Christ and to realize they need more than just me to help proclaim the story of God in their lives. And so again, I want to thank every single one of you who are part of that and helped make this week possible. Well, so every week we had, or every night, I should say, of the week, we had a special theme. Children, do you remember Monday's theme, what the overall theme was? Noah? Faith. Attaboy. I'll pay you later. So Monday night's theme was faith. Now, someone besides Noah, do you remember the story? Jonah. Daniel in the lion's den. Man, these pastor kids, they are on top of it this morning. So Monday night's theme was faith, and the story was Daniel in the lion's den. And many of you know this story. Daniel puts his faith in the God who would deliver him from the hungry lions. Now, aren't you thankful this morning, not just children, but adults, that we don't typically face such extreme circumstances in our lives? Last time I checked, I don't think anybody has been physically put in a lion's den. But Daniel had the faith in the Father that the Father would deliver him. Right? And then even if the Father wouldn't deliver him, that he was not going to deny his faith in the Lord. Faith is such an important component for every follower of Christ. That we put our faith, our trust in the God who can accomplish incredible things in our lives. I recently read a story of a group of farmers who and I know this is going to sound a little bit odd to us this morning, but at one point in the state of Mississippi, there was an extreme drought. Now, I realize that there are towns all along the Mississippi underwater right now. It seems a little awkward to talk about drought, but at one point, these farmers who were facing such extreme drought conditions, they decided to gather together at a church to hold a prayer meeting, that God would open up the sky and the rains would come. And so every farmer within like 40 miles comes to this church, and they gather and they pray, and they come in their normal like farm clothes, right? Which is just like overalls and boots and a straw hat, except one. This one farmer, he came to the prayer meeting in waders. Now, if you know what waders are, they are like overalls, except they're waterproof. And so in his estimation was, how can we pray for rain without the faith bold enough to believe that God would send it? And so there are times in our lives when we have to put our faith and our trust in the Father, even in extreme circumstances, believing that God will do what God said he will do. We, at times, must have extreme faith and trust in our Father. Well, Tuesday night's theme, besides Jonah or Noah, was, Maddie? Queen Esther was the story. What was the theme, Chris? Boldness. Man, awesome. You guys are on it. They pay attention, right? It's not just to the stories that we tell them and that we want to tell them. I learned the other day, too, that they pay attention when we don't want them to pay attention. Learned that lesson young as a father, but that's a story for another day. Right? Tuesday's night theme was boldness, and the story was Esther. Now, if you'll remember the beginning of Esther, it opens up to a world where violence was directed towards the people of God. A plan was put in place to massacre all of the exiled Jews. Haman plotted the massacre, but God used Mordecai and Esther to boldly stand up to the powers that be and to defend God's people. There are times in our lives when our faith must be lived boldly. There are times when the Father calls us to move with courage, to stand up to those who seek to do us harm and to do others harm. It's not always about standing up to kings and presidents. Sometimes it's about standing up to bullies in our schools. There are times when God requires that our faith be bold, that we must speak truth to power. I distinctly remember a story when I was in Israel of an incident that was occurring in a very public place, and one of our pastors was, in fact, the group that we were with was actually being asked to leave. And I saw this pastor stand up for the rest of his congregation in what could have been a very traumatic experience. But he trusted in the Lord, and God saw him through. We must have faith and confidence in our Father. And children, I want you to know this morning, that if you were to poll many within this congregation, they could tell you story after story of God's faithfulness in their lives. But there are times when our faith must be bold, when God will move us to act in courageous ways like Mordecai and Esther. But it's not just about faith and boldness. Wednesday night's theme was, Charlie? Kindness. And Micah, the story was the Good Samaritan. Man, 6 for 6. That's incredible. They did better than I would have done at that age. You guys did awesome. So Wednesday night's theme was kindness, and the story was the Good Samaritan. Now, most of us, we are very familiar with that story. The legal expert, he wanted to test Jesus. And so he asked Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? Right? And instead of getting the answer, Jesus says, well, what is written in the law? How do you interpret it? And he says, well, you got to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your what? Neighbor as yourself. Now, unfortunately, that legal expert, he wanted to justify himself, right? And so he asked Jesus another question, who is my neighbor? There you go. Okay, I'm going to surprise you every once in a while. It's like a pop quiz, except in a sermon form. Oh, you were doing good. Children are so much more interactive. That's awesome. They get me a little bit more. And so, the legal expert, he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus the question, well, who is my neighbor? And again, in typical Jesus fashion, he doesn't answer the question directly. Instead, in this moment, he tells a story, and this is the story of the Good Samaritan. And we know this story, right? It's where those who should have helped the man who was beaten and left for dead on the side of the road, they didn't, right? Like the pastor or the priest or the Sunday school teacher or the church board secretary or whatever, right? They didn't help. It was the enemy. It was the one who you would have at least expected to offer assistance. That was the one who helped. That was the one who showed the beaten man kindness. Right? And we all know this morning that we live in a world that is mean, that is filled with outrage and anger. And sometimes that anger is not the good kind of anger, right? It is the vicious and malicious anger that lashes out at innocent people. Where one of the most radical, bold things that we can do is to be kind in a world that seems to be in such short supply of kindness. I am telling this congregation all the time, children, you should know this, that one of the most important things for us to do as we go out through these doors in just a few moments is to be kind to people. It is a very revolutionary thing. And in fact, if they were listening to last week's sermon where Jesus talks about being the way, is that we are called to live that way, the Jesus way. This way of grace and love and kindness and hope to the rest of the world. I encourage our congregation to do that. I encourage you to do that because it's what the world needs from us today. Well, of course, Thursday night is always a fun night. Does anybody remember the theme from Thursday night? Fun, there you go, right. It's just really fun. And so all we do, and I encouraged all of us to gather together, is that we just fellowship. There's some bounce houses out there, and thankfully the weather cooperated this week, and so it was pleasant, it was beautiful, it was a little cold, but we had a water slide, and if you'll remember Thursday night, the rain stopped. But like I said, it was a little chilly, and some of us were challenged, and it was fun because there was a conversation going on amongst adults of how much money would it take for us to go down that water slide, because I'm convinced that at one point, I don't know the ratio between like water coming out of the faucet and water that was dispensed from a human body. And you'll catch my drift there, what I mean by that. And so I was very hesitant, and so we were putting a dollar amount on what it would take for me to get on top of that slide and to slide down into I don't know what. Suffice it to say, it was above like $20,000. I'll be willing to do it if anybody wants to give me that. But it was a fun night, and it's an opportunity for us to pause from a very busy week. But the reason why we do that is because I think it's important for us to connect with others. I love that children come from all over the community and become a part of our Vacation Bible School, but I think it's important for us to have opportunities to connect with their parents. And so that's why every Thursday night, since I've been the pastor of this church, we have an intentional connect night, is because I want an opportunity to get to know their mom and dad or their grandparents or their guardians and to listen to their story, because I believe it's important, and I believe it provides us an opportunity to get to know other people on a deeper level and to listen to their story, but to ultimately share that hope that we have, that faith that we have in the Father, that boldness that at times the Father requires us to live, but ultimately to live out that kindness towards others. It was a fun week. It was a beautiful week. It was an exhausting week, and I am glad that in just a few moments it is officially over. Because as much fun as it has, there is, I believe, a limit to how much fun you can have. And there ought to be just, I think, for the next few days in the Lynn household, silence, quietness, and boringness is what I'm looking forward to in our house. I don't know if I'm going to get it, but we'll see. Children, I hope that this week was an impactful week for each of you. Parents and grandparents, I hope that it was an impactful week for you and that you continue having the faith conversations with your children and your grandchildren. Because it is our responsibility, it is our privilege to continue to pass down this story of redemption and hope. And the God who calls us, who can do these incredible things in our lives, tell that story. Be kind to others. Trust in the Father. And at times, be bold and courageous for the Father. Well, in just a few moments, the children are going to come back up. And they are going to lead us in a wonderful song, God of Wonders. And they're going to close us out. And after they come, and you children can go ahead and come on up here, by the way, if you want. After they are done, I will lead us in a prayer and then the benediction.